Great. Well, thanks all for coming, for showing an interest in my work. I've called the talk "I'm a Republican Honest" because you might not believe me by the end of the talk, so I need to get these things in nice and early. It's also definitions important for any Americans in the audience. I should point out I'm not this kind of Republican. For any French people in the audience, I should point out I'm not really, yeah, maybe 20, 30 years ago, but not so much these days. So what am I? Well, I'm kind of that wishy-washy, Guardian reading, liberal sort of Republican who just thinks there's probably a better way to run a country than by who happens to be the child of somebody else. So, given all that, what am I doing running a website that lists the line of succession to the British throne? Well, I blame Quora. So, I joined Quora, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 years ago. I thought I would answer questions on Pearl, Doctor Who, bad television from the 1980s, you know, standard kind of thing, science fiction. Didn't quite work out like that. See, the thing is, they do this, well, there's an algorithm somewhere that kind of, it works out what you've answered questions on and starts throwing those questions. And I guess so you see London's on that list. History's probably just outside that list. So I started answering questions on Buckingham Palace or the Tower of London and stuff like that. Before that, they make you an expert on royalty. But it's really not very difficult to become an expert on various topics on Quora, because most of the questions on Quora are terrible. Allow me to show you some examples of some of the questions that made me a Quora expert on the British royalty. Now, this doesn't sound like such a terrible question until you realise that England hasn't had a queen for over 300 years. It's now the Queen of the United Kingdom. Americans, naming no names, president, sometimes have difficulty distinguishing between these concepts. Why does Britain always have a queen and not a king? That basically comes down to genes, I think. And besides, it's not actually 100% true. This is a trick question, because if Prince Charles died before Queen Elizabeth II, we'd still have a queen, not a king. Then there's the conspiracy theory ones. And the answer to this is stop getting your news from supermarket tabloids. And then there's my all-time classic. I kind of, when I read this, I get this mental image of the Queen climbing out of a window in Buckingham Palace, shimmering down a drain pipe, somehow smuggling herself across to Paris, and then being there with a sniper and blowing out the tyres on the car. Sorry? Sorry? Yeah. Well, yeah, and I've seen that, so it must be true. So the answer to this one is no. So anyway, this is what you all came to see. This is all the information that you need in order to become a Quora expert on the British royal family, or more specifically, how to become King and Queen of the UK. And bonus, 15 other Commonwealth realms that you become the monarch of at the same time. So, step 1, be a close relation of the monarch. Child is probably best, then a sibling or a niece or nephew, that kind of thing. There's a step 1A, which is don't be a woman with a younger brother, because men are obviously more important. Step 2, so many people get this wrong. Don't die before the monarch. Can we hold that thought? Step 3 is don't be illegitimate. That's not a huge problem these days, but if you go back 400, 500, 600 years, that was a big problem, and a lot of the reason they at various points when they changed the family that was in charge, it was because, oh, he's illegitimate, he can't be the king. And step 4, don't be Catholic. They hate Catholics. And there's a step 4a, which is don't even marry a Catholic because, I don't know, mixing the bodily fluids is seen as somehow bad or something like that.
That's how the Dutch king lost his place in the line of succession.
Sorry, that's how?
That's how the Dutch king lost his place.
Oh yeah, well yes. But as some of you skipped ahead, there have been some recent-ish updates to this. We have the Succession to the Crown Act that came in 2013. So this step 1a, don't be a woman with a younger brother, that's now out. Women are now seen as just as important as men. Well, yeah, ones that were born after a certain day. You have to have a cut-off for these things. Step 4a, the thing about not even marrying a Catholic, that's now right out. But they do still insist you wear a full-body condom. That's not true. So the current rules are be royal, be alive, be legitimate, and don't be a Catholic. That Catholic thing is really important. And it's only the Catholics. They say nothing about Islam or Hindus or atheists or anything like that. You just can't be a Catholic. So once I'd worked all this out, I had a brilliant idea. So let's calculate what the line of succession was on every date back to 1701. Why 1701, Dave, I hear you ask? Well, it's an interesting story that I don't have time in my 20 minutes to tell you, but it has to do with Catholics. Now, how hard can it be? And you know, every time you ask yourself that question, the answer is far harder than you think it's going to be. But basically, it's a family tree, and some of you who have known me for a few years will know that I've got previous knowledge in this area. I do genealogy in my spare time. I understand how family trees work. And it's basically just a family tree. In fact, it's even easier than a family tree, because if you're talking about the royal bloodline, it's just the people that are actually descended from the Queen, so we can cross out all these people that married into the family and just list the people who are descended from the Queen. That gets us to 19 people. That's quite a dynasty, actually, for one old lady. But we can do better than that. I set myself a challenge of having the first 30 in the line of succession on every day back to 1701. So we need to start looking at the descendants of George VI, that's the current Queen's father. So he had 2 daughters, the current Queen and Prince Margaret, who fails on the don't be dead rule. But she has 2 children, each of them have 2 children, so that's another 6 people we can add on to our list. The descendants of George VI's father, that's where the Duke of Kent, Duke of Gloucester, people like that come into the thing. Descendants of Edward, descendants of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria had 9 children, and they married into the whole of the royalty all the way across Europe. So it gets complicated from at this point. You get people who have got their fingers in the royal family of every country. Maybe not literally got their fingers. Well, maybe literally got their fingers in the royal family of every country in Europe, and all the way back. You go past all the Hanoverian Georges, and eventually we want to get to the descendants of Sophia. Who the hell is Sophia? I hear you ask, because we've never heard of Queen Sophia. Well, again, 1701, don't be Catholic. Sophia was the next person on the list who wasn't a Catholic. They had to skip over about 50 Catholics to find the next Protestant on the list. So she was made the next in line to the throne. And do you remember the don't be dead rule? She died about 6 weeks before Queen Anne did. And so her eldest son became George I. So current estimates say there are somewhere around 6,000 living descendants of Sophia. So it's not a small task that I've found myself, but Wikipedia is your friend. I've spent many a pleasant... Yes. I spent many a pleasant afternoon cutting and pasting information out of Wikipedia. Some of the complications that I've come across. Titles and names. These people cannot keep the same title for more than a couple of weeks at a time. If we look at our current Queen, when she was born, her father was the Duke of York, not that Duke of York. And so she was known as Princess Elizabeth of York. In 1936, her uncle abdicates, her father becomes king, she becomes the Princess Elizabeth. 1947, she marries the Duke of Edinburgh and becomes the Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, and in 1952 she becomes Queen. It's not just her, pretty much everyone in the family has multiple titles depending on what day you're looking at. So, you know, you have to add a titles table with start and end dates for each title, and that's, you know, we understand how to do that, not too difficult. Exclusions, well, maybe you're excluded because you married a Catholic. Maybe you become included again because you divorced the Catholic. Maybe you became included because the law on being excluded for being a Catholic was abolished. So we need to have an exclusions table and that work that the same way, so we can cut off people. Oh, maybe you're excluded because you became a Catholic. This is actually interesting because children aren't officially recognised as Catholic until their confirmation, which is something that happens to them when they're about 13 or 14. So you can have a situation where you've got a family where the two parents are both Catholics, all the children are being brought up as Catholics, but their children are still on the line of succession until they officially become confirmed as Catholics. And then as they get older, you gradually see those children being knocked off the list. Now, so we touched upon this male preference primogenitor, the idea that men are more important, which is obvious bollocks. This was abolished, as I said, on March the 27th in 2013, when the Succession to the Crown Act came in. It was abolished for people that were born after the 28th of October 2011, which those of you who are observant will have spotted that was 18 months earlier. So that's led us to some interesting situations. Enter Senna Lewis. She is the daughter of Davina Lewis, who is a granddaughter of the Duke of, either the Duke of Gloucester or Kent, I can't remember which. Anyway, she was born in June 2010, and she was at that time she was 24th in line. She. A couple of years later, her younger brother, Tane is a New Zealander male name. He was born, and because he's a young boy, he's obviously more important, and he gets in. By this time, Senna has dropped to 26th, and then Tane comes in as 26th, pushes Senna down to 27th. So we have the situation that on the 26th of March, 2017, the 2013, the day before the law changed, we've got Tane at 26 and Senna at 27, and then 2 days later, when the laws come in, they've switched around. Your data model that's dealing with this needs to cope with situations like this. Mine currently doesn't. It's a bug. So a few technicalities. It's a Dancer 2 app. I like Dancer. Some of the presentation challenges. You'll notice that if you look at one of the pages, it tells you here the relationship of the person to the Queen. This is for a genealogist, it's a relatively trivial thing. You just walk up the trees until you find the nearest common ancestor. You count the number of generations, and then you've got a table saying how many generations on both of them, and you find out, oh, well, that's second cousin once removed, or something like that. Easy to do, a lot of data to crunch, especially when you're displaying 30 people on one page. So enter memcached. This is the perfect stuff for caching. Or more specifically, I used CHI, the cache handling interface. And if you take one relatively serious thing out of my relatively unserious talk, CHI is a brilliant interface for caching. So this is my caching code. Basically, this is I've added a cache attribute, and then I've got this get relationship between people, get passed into DB objects, and then the compute method is the clever part in CHI. Basically, it says, look in the cache. If it's there, use that value. Otherwise, call this method, which is a method on my dbit classes. And then it hides all the difficult caching stuff. Didn't work. Very clever, didn't work. Didn't work for the reasons which you can't read because the font is too small, but basically in a template, not in my code, but in TT code, I was calling the dbit method directly rather than going through my model class. So 2 lessons learned. 1, always use a model layer, and I don't mean always write a model layer, I mean always use a model layer. 2nd, cache all the things all the time. And that's a picture of my cache hits at the moment, so I think I'm pretty much doing the right thing there. What else? Oh yeah, so there's this previous change link showing you, so you can skip through the changes. There's a batch job to calculate the succession on every date. Currently takes about 8 hours to run, so I need to do some work on clearing this up. And then note the dates when it changes, because obviously if you look at the succession today, it's the same as the succession was yesterday and the day before, back until the last baby was born or the last person died. And I support dates in the URL, so you can put an ISO date on the end of the URL and get the succession on that date. But a lot of these will all have the same content because the succession doesn't change every day. And Google doesn't like duplicate content. Those of you that came, there's nobody here that came on my SEO talk on Tuesday. Oh yes, there is, hi. You'll know that, that duplicate content is bad, and Google gives us a canonical tag which allows us to mark stuff as duplicate, but we know it's duplicate, and say to Google, don't index the duplicate versions, because we know what we're doing. Bit more SEO stuff. Again, I should do this before my workshop and then encourage people to come to my SEO workshop. Structured data, if you look at the source code, there's all these weird, not quite HTML bits in. Google recognizes those as structured data, which it then sucks into its knowledge graph, so it knows that I'm talking about the Prince of Wales and stuff like that, and it's a person, things like that. Google likes its structured data, that's good. Just to finish off the to-do list, I need more data. Currently I've got back to about the start of the 19th century, so I've got at least another 100 years to go back, but of course the further you go back, the more people there are that have descended, so it gets harder. More views. Currently there's just a single view, which is a list of the succession. I'd like to maybe do some kind of tree view so you can see the family relationships. I've also got an idea of having a person page where you can see not only how their titles changed through time, but also maybe a spark line of how their position in the succession went up and down over time. Maybe some kind of SVG. Some of you might have read some blog posts that I wrote last year. I was playing with SVG, which I found to be kind of fun. So maybe drawing a proper tree using SVG. More marketing. So this site's been up and running for 6, 7, 8 months, but nobody ever comes. No one knows about it. It's very sad. So I do talks like this because now you consider yourself marketed to. So now come and play with my website. So that's the URL, lineofsuccession.co.uk. There's the code. There's a Twitter account for the website itself. There's my personal Twitter account because I'm needy and need validation by the number of Twitter followers. Thank you very much. I hope it was at least entertaining, even if you didn't learn anything particularly useful, but CHI is very cool. And final thing to say is Vive la Revolution. Thank you very much. Oh, I have 1 minute for questions.
I'd like to validate you because this sort of thing is really important to Gloria. We own a timeshare in Hawaii, but we only own it for the last living descendant of Ronald Reagan or Queen Elizabeth II.
Okay, well, so the last living descendant. All of the so the fact that she's just had a new great granddaughter that was born just a couple of months ago, that's another person.
But you are making it easier for people who want to wipe out the whole.
That's true. But did I mention I was a Republican? Sure.
Is there any examples of people being excommunicated from the Catholic Church or giving up?
Well, see, that's interesting because it doesn't help. Because the Act of Settlement from 1701, which is the thing that actually puts this, basically says that becoming a Catholic has exactly the same effect as dying. Okay. So if you were to then suddenly, oh no, I'm not a Catholic anymore, it doesn't help because as far as they're concerned, yeah.
No zombies.
Yes, we don't like zombies as monarchs.
On the other hand, it means your children are still in the succession.
Yeah. Yes.
Wait, but what if you have children after you have a Catholic death?
Who have not been confirmed.
Right.
That's
If they haven't been confirmed, they're fine. It's up to them.
children, and then, yeah.
It's happened up to 9 months after you die.
So you being a Catholic doesn't affect your children. It's up to them to decide whether they become a Catholic or not. But you being illegitimate is bad news for all of your children and their children because once that line is marked as illegitimate, you're a write-off.
But it's not like that hasn't changed in history.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I have a Catholic wedding, was I legitimate?
Yeah.
That doesn't affect anything.
Catholic weddings are still legitimate. And that's
Anyway, I'm here all week if anyone wants to stop me in the corridor and ask me more questions about the line of succession and the British royal family. But otherwise, I think we should all go downstairs, upstairs. I'm so confused and listen to Gloria talking, which will be far more interesting. Thank you.